Welcome back to Canon Law in Exile. This is video number 7, and we're in lesson 7, which is on the supreme authority in the church. Hope you all had a very nice Easter, and welcome back, though probably most of you didn't travel very much over the holiday. Anyway, let's get started. Woodall begins by discussing the meaning of supreme authority in the church, what we actually mean by that. This is going to be a good area to recall our first lesson where we talked about divine law and human law completing divine law. So kind of keep that in the back of your head if you could. One of Woodall's main themes in this chapter, which is chapter 4, is that the structure of the church is not a matter of human arrangement, but rather of divine law. This is a key theme of chapter 4. It belongs to the church's very nature. It's just not some way of setting up the church, but at least in its basic elements, it belongs to the church's very nature. And what we have, this structure, again, at least in its essence, is actually willed by Christ. The church's nature is both collegial and primatial. And Woodall cites Canon 330 on this, which I'll leave it to you to take a look at. Collegial and primatial. Collegial, governed by a college, but primatial, there's someone who has specific primacy. But both are key. And of course, what we're talking about are the two offices or two ministries, the Petran office, the office of Peter, and the apostolic office, the office of the apostles, the office of the bishops. Both of these, Woodall tells us, are rooted in the Lord's own will and action in instituting them. We have specific words and actions of the Lord himself that we trace these ministries back to. And these two, the Petran and the apostolic, or as we said, the collegial and the primatial, they're complementary and both are necessary to the church. This is another key theme. First, that the structure we have is of divine institution. It's not merely human, but also that what we have, the governing structure that we have, is both collegial and primatial. We have two subjects along these same lines. Again, if we're going to have collegial and primatial authority, we're going to have the Petran office, and we're going to have the apostolic office or ministry as well. Not surprising that we have two subjects of the supreme authority in the church. This is what I'm drawing from right now is not Woodall, but it's from another canonist that I've mentioned, Jose Martin Degar. I think he's a little bit clearer on this, though it should resonate with what we've just been saying about Woodall. So we've got the supreme authority, and there are two subjects. Of course, the Roman Pontiff and the College of Bishops. There are two entities that can exercise supreme authority in the church. Supreme governance, deciding how the church is to be governed, but also supreme teaching authority. One of those authorities is the Roman Pontiff, and the other is the College of Bishops. Now, these two authorities, they're not juxtaposed like we would think of in the civil realm when we think of checks and balances between the executive branch and the legislative branch or something like that. We don't think of them that way. They're not juxtaposed. They're not they're not set at contrary purposes to each other. The Roman Pontiff, he always exercises the supreme authority. Um, Even when he's acting as the College of Bishop, as head of the College of Bishops, he still is exercising the supreme authority. So he always is in exercise of his supreme authority. Um, the College of Bishops, however, it exercises supreme power only when it's acting in union with the Roman Pontiff and under his guidance. So keep those differences in mind. Specifically, when we think of the College of Bishops exercising its supreme authority, we usually are thinking of an ecumenical council. And there you see it. It's the bishops are all there. They're under the authority of the Pope, but the bishops have their key role as well. So that might be helpful just to help you think of what the actual exercise looks like. Okay, let's talk about the role of the papacy. This is, if you're following in Woodall, as I hope you are, this is page 114. And he talks about the patron office or function. And he makes this very interesting point early on. He says, the Pope is within the church, he's within the episcopate, the bishops, and he's within the College of Bishops. He's a member of the college. But neither his position nor his authority come from any of these. It's not from the church, not from the bishop, not from being a bishop, and not from being a member of the College of Bishops. At least his authority as Roman Pontiff. Rather, and this is Canon 331 that we're relying on, his authority is of divine institution, the patron office, the office of Peter that we're talking about. And this office, it's part of God's revelation. I don't think we always think of it that way, but it's actually part of the revelation. It's not just mechanics. It's not just a way to get things done. It's not just, well, you have to have somebody in charge. This is actually part of the revelation. And Woodall makes an interesting characterization. He calls it a gift. He calls the patron office a gift. He says it's a gift from Christ to the church for the whole of its existence on earth. What can this mean? How can we call the patron office a gift? It might sound strange because we're talking about an office that's essentially exercising authority over us, potentially telling us what to do, and that's not usually what people think of as a gift. But this is nonetheless a question that's good to meditate on or pray about. In what sense is the patron office a gift? I think we can access this idea in one way, a lot of different ways, but one is by talking about a document that I think we've discussed before. In the late 19th century, the church decided that it had to come to a judgment on whether ordination in the Anglican communion was valid or not. Now, the church had ruled on this before, but it saw the need to reaffirm and to even reaffirm in a stronger way. So Pope Leo XIII studied the matter and looked at what the church previously had said, and then he issued a document called Apostolicae Curae. This was in 1896, and he said that Anglican ordination in the Anglican communion is invalid, and really kind of settled this question. Well, shortly after this, the Orthodox decided that maybe the Orthodox should come to a decision on the validity of Anglican orders. They actually got together to discuss and study the question. But what happened? They did not reach any agreement, and they simply went home. I think that this is kind of a lesson in the great utility of having the patron office. There's having the patriarchies in the East, that can be a deliberative body. That's the strength of a college, having a deliberative body, um, deciding questions, discussing them, seeing all the viewpoints. But for action and for energy and executing a decision, having uh, a single authority also has a very important role, and I think we see this with apostolicae curiae. Okay, the next section is I had you skip in Woodall. It's on the primacy of the Pope, and I had you skip it not because it's unimportant. It's very important, and we're going to discuss it. But Woodall's treatment of it is just okay. So I'll say more about that in a minute, but we're going to cover it. But just keep in mind, if you're writing, you'll see as we discuss this some of the limitations of what Woodall says. We'll look at Canon 331. What that canon says is it describes the authority of the Pope, of the Roman Pontiff, and it says, by virtue of his office, or munus, the Roman Pontiff has supreme, full, immediate, universal, and ordinary power in the Church. Here's a summary here. By virtue of his office, the Roman Pontiff has supreme, full, immediate, universal, ordinary power in the Church. What is the challenge in understanding this canon? The challenge is to understand all 5 of these types of power and the differences between them. And the shortcomings of some explanations are that these terms may bleed into each other, and it will not become apparent what the difference is between them, what each one of the 5 adds to the equation. And I think that's a difficulty with most discussions of this canon and of the Pope's power, and I'm afraid even with Woodall's treatment. Woodall's treatment isn't bad, I don't think it does justice to all 5 of these. Again, Martin Degar, we're not using his book, but in some areas his book is a bit better. He does, I think, a better job of covering all 5 of these. And you can see this when we say the Pope has supreme, full, universal authority. You can see, well, those under one understanding could sound almost like the same thing. How do we discuss these terms and give life to each one without it sounding like it's just emphasis and we're just trying to say the same thing over and over again to make sure that you get the message? That's not what it is. Each one of these things has a different meaning, and we'll talk about that. Okay, if you want to see Woodall's description, which you did not read, it's at page 116 and 117. And if you want to just make a note and say, that's why we didn't read it, because I think his treatment doesn't adequately distinguish all 5 of these types of authority. Okay, let's start actually at the bottom. Ordinary power. What is ordinary power? This is very easy. Ordinary power is simply power that is attached to an office. So we're saying that the Pope has power and it's attached to his office as Bishop of Rome. And that's going to be a common thing in the Church. Your office as pastor is going to have power attached to it. Your office as parochial vicar will have power attached to it. When you become a bishop, those of you who are becoming ordained, that office, obviously the diocesan bishop certainly will have power attached to it. what other kind of power is there? A couple of kinds. One would be the power of orders. There are some things that you can do by virtue of your ordination, not by virtue of your office. That's going to be one type of power that's not ordinary power, not connected to the office, connected to your ordination. Another kind is delegated power. You as pastor can delegate someone uh, to officiate at a wedding. If I'm the one you delegate, I am able to fulfill that office because you have delegated me, not because of my office. Even if I'm pastor someplace else, you delegated me to officiate at the wedding of your subjects, of people in your parish. I can't do that by my own office. That's you and your office. But I can do it because you've delegated me. So delegated is going to be a different kind of power than ordinary. Ordinary is easy. OO. It's ordinary. It's attached to an office. That's all it means when we say ordinary, small o, ordinary power. As we've said, when we say big O, ordinary, that's a noun, and that means essentially the bishop, the vicar general, and the episcopal vicar. Okay, let's jump up the list to supreme. What does supreme mean? We're going to talk about supreme power just because it's easy. The supreme is exactly what you think it is. Supreme just means it's the highest. We're just saying the Roman Pontiff is the highest authority. He has supreme power in the church, or certainly supreme ordinary power, the supreme power attached to an office. That's all supreme means, is the highest. So these two at the beginning and end are quite easy. Okay, what about full? Full is difficult. First, because it sounds like it could mean just some of these other terms, like it could mean the same thing as supreme. It's not the same. Full power is not the same necessarily as supreme power. When we say full power, we mean this in at least a couple of senses. One is that the Pope is nothing is withdrawn from his authority. He's the head not only of the Diocese of Rome, not only of other bishops in the college, but he's even, in a sense, the head of all the religious institutions. He's the supreme authority of all religious institutions in the world. He's also the head, in a sense, of all associations, and he has control, not control, but at least oversight of all the church property in the world. So we're saying full in that sense, that all these things in church life, if you go up the ladder, eventually you, at least theoretically, you get to the Pope. That's one sense of what it means to have full authority. Another sense is, remember when we've talked about episcopal vicars. An episcopal vicar he's an ordinary, big O, ordinary. He has authority in a specific sector. He's Episcopal vicar for Hispanics in the diocese, or he's Episcopal vicar for the Southeast region, or something like that. He has a sector of authority in the church. Not true of the Pope. That, in that sense, think of the Pope as being just very different from an Episcopal vicar. It's not just a sector that he's in charge of, but has full authority. This is still probably the most difficult concept, full authority. Maybe immediate is also a challenge, but full is a bit of a challenge. But think of it that way, that we're not talking only in terms of bishops and so forth, but also heads of other institutions, religious institutions, associations, church property, when we're talking about the Pope. Okay, what else do we have left? Universal. What does universal authority mean? This one also, I think, is not too difficult. We're saying that he has authority in all dioceses, and in all parts of the world. I don't think you'll be too surprised to hear that. But also think of universal in this sense. He's the head not only of the Latin Church, but he also has authority over the other Catholic churches, the Byzantine, the Syro-Malabar, the Coptic, the Maronite, etc. So even the Eastern churches, he also has authority over. So again, not like an Episcopal vicar, not just a sector of authority, not even just the very large Latin sector. He has authority even over the Eastern, even over the Eastern churches. Traditionally, they've had a high degree of autonomy, and that's important. But the Pope has authority over them. Okay, finally, our last one, immediate. What does immediate authority mean? This one may be difficult because almost nothing springs to mind when we hear of immediate power. That's probably a new term entirely. Well, here's what it means. It really has three meanings. One, the authority is received directly from God. Again, we said it's not just the authority from the cardinals. The cardinals elect him, but it's not authority from the cardinals. The cardinals are, a mechanism, but the authority comes from God. So that's what immediate authority means in one sense. Also, immediate in the sense of the Pope exercises his authority directly over the faithful. And the third sense is connected with the second. He does not exercise his authority through other bishops, but he can exercise authority directly on the other members of the faithful. He may act through others, may act through other bishops, but he doesn't have to. So those three meanings of immediate: received directly from God, exercises his authority directly over the faithful, and does not exercise, or at least does not need to exercise, his authority through other bishops. The Pope, this is Canon 333, the Pope decides whether to exercise his authority personally or collegially. Some things he'll want to do on his own, and some things he'll want to do through others. Okay, next section, the papacy and collegiality, page 117 in Woodall. Again, Woodall emphasizes that the Pope's authority, really, it's from Christ. It's not from the bishops. And then we're told, I'm sorry, this is actually, again, from Martin de Gar, not from Woodall, but Martin de Gar makes this nice point that I think, again, it's not in Woodall, but it fits very well with what Woodall tells us. The Pope is not the delegate of the cardinals. Even though the cardinals elected him, he's not their delegate. Uh, what does that mean? We talked about officiating at a marriage. You're the pastor, you delegated me to officiate at a marriage, but then you found out something about me that would make me unsuitable to officiate at the marriage. So you can withdraw the delegation so that I cannot officiate. The cardinals cannot do that. They can't just, he's not the delegate the way I'm your delegate. If you delegated me to witness a marriage in your parish, the Pope is not the delegate of the cardinals. He is elected, but the cardinals have no power to remove him or to supervise him in any way. Nonetheless, and this is on page 117 in Woodall, very important point, quote, nevertheless, it would be a mistake to imagine that the Pope's power is absolute, end quote. That's on page 117, and he's citing another canonist named James Corridon. What does this mean? Why do we say the Pope's? Interestingly, we said he has supreme authority, nevertheless, though, not absolute authority. What does that mean? First, he has to follow the previous magisterium. He's the servant of the deposit of faith. He's not, in a sense, the master of it. He also has to work with the other bishops. He can't just abolish the episcopate, but the episcopate also is instituted by Christ. And the faithful have lawful autonomy, and that's something that they're entitled to. We're entitled to lawful freedom. Um, so if there's not a specific reason, our freedom should not be unduly hindered. Also, commentators have said he may not act arbitrarily, and his power is limited by the purpose for which the church was founded. So he can exercise power for the purposes that uh, the church has, but that doesn't, excuse me, that doesn't mean that he can pronounce on that he can pronounce on any subject whatsoever. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I was going to go a little bit further, but since I'm coughing, I'll stop here. This is just slightly early. I'll pick up here at the next lecture. Thank you.